Hello and welcome to Man's Model Moments. In today's video I'm going to bring you another combined unboxing and build video. This time it's of a slightly more substantial and up-to-date subject and tooling. It's this, the ICM Leopard 2A6 with crew. This is a special edition from ICM and it was a bit of a surprise for me, but it does make perfect sense since these vehicles have been fighting in the Ukraine for some time now. You can also buy the Leopard 2 crew separately as an individual boxing if you already have a Leopard 2A6 and want to make it into a diorama, or even just to give it a bit of extra life. Now I actually unboxed this on livestream together with a host of other ICM July releases, which I'll link here if anyone wants to see what's in that. As such, the unboxing format will be a bit different to normal, but don't worry, you'll get plenty of chance to examine all the plastic in the build section. The instructions are the typical ICM format booklet with the box art replicated at the top. Below that is the usual short descriptive text in Ukrainian and English, and the ICM paint guide showing the colours used in the build. The QR code here is not for a YouTube video instruction guide, as many other modern ICM toolings however, just their website, and the reason for that will become apparent soon. Opening the booklet, we can see the sprue frame layouts for all the components. One of the frames is almost entirely unused however, and although only one set of side skirts is shown, there is another completely unused set which don't feature here, so this is just showing frames with used components. Construction shows a completely normal build sequence for a tank of this type in ICM's usual clear isometric construction views. One piece which is also slightly unusual for an ICM kit is the instructions asking you to make some stretched sprue for the antennas. There's also a guide to cut the clear styrene supplied in the kit for the large periscope. Other than these, there are no real surprises in the construction, and we find ourselves at the first full colour 5 view of one of the unit options supplied. Going through these, there are no less than 6 different Ukrainian units that you can represent here, which is the most I think I've seen in any kit, although the camouflage is the same standard 3-colour NATO scheme employed on most European Leopard 2s. Moving on to the crew figure instructions, these are the familiar single sheet used for most ICM figure sets, showing the frame layout to start with, though this second tree here in orange actually isn't present in the kit. We then have the ICM colour guide used for the figures, and then overleaf we have the combined painting and construction guide. ICM figure instructions don't give you any sequence, they just indicate which parts are which and allow you to choose the order you find best. The main challenge here will be in painting however, as ICM give you an example of the pixel camo used by the troops, but representing that in 1/35th scale will be another matter. So the decals come as a nice little sheet of Ukrainian badges and markings and are very well printed. As you can see in the macro view, the finesse and register of these are fantastic, and I love the representation of hand painting for the identification crosses too. You might prefer to create your own markings by painting them yourself, but these look like an excellent option if you don't want to go down that road. Overall, extremely impressive as most ICM decal sheets are. Now even before opening up the various bags containing the plastic frames, it's obvious that these are not native ICM toolings. Once you get them out and handle them, this is even more apparent. The plastic is a warmer, slightly more stone-coloured grey than normal, the frames are constructed differently, and the plastic feels a bit harder and more brittle than ICM's normal fare. That's because, if you hadn't already guessed from the title or looking this kit up on ScaleMates, this is not an ICM original tool, but instead the 2012 Revell tooling of the Leopard 2A6. That made me a bit nervous when I first saw that this was the case, and it is reflected in several areas of the kit, which I'll come back to at several points. Firstly, there is more flash than an ICM tool. Most of the worst pieces are actually on the sprue runners themselves, but some parts suffer from a small amount too, such as one of the tank's hull sides by the running gear. Apart from this, however, the castings look pretty decent, with some nicely moulded detail in the form of bolts and recesses. I'll speak more of this during the build, but the overall impression here is not a particularly bad one. Maybe slight disappointment, but I wasn't expecting a new mould from ICM, as they are very clear when they produce one. The main top hull on my kit was pretty badly warped, probably because the frame is rather badly designed with little to keep it rigid. You'll see this during the build in more detail. The Rheinmetall 120mm L55 smoothbore cannon is unfortunately moulded in two pieces longitudinally, meaning that you will have a seam to deal with on the finished barrel. Other elements, however, like the machine guns and exterior surface detailing, is all quite nice. Perhaps not up to a Tamiya, Meng or similar level, but nice enough. The tracks are the rubber band type, but come in two sections per track, something I don't think I've ever seen before. They have very broad connection points, however, and seem to fit together very nicely just on dry fitting. In fact, the material Revell have used for these tracks is pretty good, certainly a step above some other manufacturers where vinyl tracks can feel slightly greasy. These are almost a matte finish rather than the usual shiny stuff. You also get rear mud flaps in this material. And then these, the worst elements of the kit. These are the tow cables, and whilst it may have seemed a good idea to make them in this flexible material back in 2012, it really wasn't. Firstly, 99% of the material here is in the runners. The tow cable itself makes a tiny amount of the overall mass, which seems an incredible waste of material, especially given that it's all going to end up in a landfill. Secondly, the cables themselves are very thin, so you're going to need to be very careful to not cut or snap them when cutting them free of that mass of excess rubber. Thirdly, and finally, they just don't look very good. I'll show you at the end, but my advice for these is to send them back to Revell. Maybe they can put them in a pot and make something useful out of them. In stark contrast to those are the ICM Leopard crew figures that come in this box. These are all on a single frame familiar to anyone that has made any ICM figure sets before. You get 5.5 figures here, including the doggo. I won't show all of these in macro view as you'll see them all later, but here are just some examples of the detail included here. This is the dog, which has a lot of character and nicely restrained fur texture. This is one of the figure's arms, showing the pulling and creasing of the fabric as the arm is extended, and the sculpting of the hand, something that always shows a good figure sculptor, I think. Here's one of the torsos, with half-open tunic with zipper puller, more excellent fabric sculpting, and the dog treat. Now I just want to take a moment to thank all of you who have supported me directly through YouTube memberships and Patreon. This really does keep the channel going, and without you it would be very difficult for me to be able to continue doing this. Now if you're only just seeing your name on here for the first time, it's because I update this monthly, and if I've prepared some videos ahead of time, then there may still have the old list on, even if the list has been updated since then. Don't worry though, your name will get on the list and will continue to appear throughout your support. If you are considering supporting me, YouTube channel membership is by far the easiest way to do this, since Patreon is becoming a more challenging platform to engage with. Whichever you choose, however, I absolutely appreciate your contributions, and don't forget to come and check out the private members Discord, which you get access to at any level. The build starts in pretty standard fashion, with the first step completing the right side hull of the tank. The main hull assembly has a couple of internal bulkheads to strengthen it, and these push fit nicely into their positions between the Revell logo moulded inside the bottom of the hull, just in case you were still doubting the origins of this tooling. The sides can then be brought in one at a time, and here it became apparent that the lower hull was also slightly warped at the rear. Working from front to back gluing this in place, however, means that you really only have the small area past the bulkhead that is fairly easily brought back into line. This can all then be repeated with the second side piece in the same manner. This leaves you to bring the rear hull in to lock everything in place. It does take a bit of jiggling to make sure everything is aligned and not popping out of place once something else is moved, but it's actually not that difficult, and it's worth spending a little time getting it right, since this is the foundation of the entire vehicle. I did find I needed to go back to it a couple of times though to add glue and adjust. And eventually I also clamped it. Now at this point you're supposed to bring in the top of the main hull, but as you can see, my example was warped in both dimensions, and I really didn't want to try to force it into place until my main hull was properly dry. Instead, I just put in this little hatch, which I thought might help in making it a little less warped, and it did need a bit of persuading to lie flat in the hull because of that. I also put in the rear left external engine fan assembly, which nicely can only locate one way due to this little inset tab. As I wasn't closing the hull yet, running gear was next. The drive sprockets have some very undesirable attachment gates that need careful trimming with a knife, which isn't difficult, but I'd expect more from a modern kit really. The two halves of this go together when trimmed very positively however, which is great. All the wheels, both the front tensioner and the main road wheels, are all two parts with very positive locating lugs on them, and they go together really well. As the lower hull was still drying in the clamp, I opted to move on to build the turret. The lower part of this comes in 3 pieces which have large, flat mating surfaces which make building them up a breeze. As well as being longitudinally split, my barrel was also warped a bit, so holding one end produced a comical split at the other. Once again, working from the breech end, I cemented this bit by bit, which eliminated most of the issue. I then popped the muzzle on, which brought the thinner ends together, and closed it all up. It was then just a case of putting the barrel into the internal block piece, which was easy as a triangular cutout again means it can only fit one way. The spaced armour at the front of the turret by the gun was next, the top plate going on first, with the side plates sitting in very nicely and just needing a little extra thin cement to secure them. Looking at the completed gun, however, it didn't look quite right, and I realised I'd glued the muzzle on both backwards and at 90 degrees rotation to where it should be. There is actually a tab in the piece to align this, but it's so subtle that it's very easy to get this wrong, so just watch out for that. With the gun now correctly completed, I could put in its internal mounts in the lower turret. This is a nice snug fit, and it's an easy step, and quite satisfying once it's complete. Before the upper turret can be brought in, the optics for the gunner need adding into the housing from underneath. This is a tad fiddly, but not the worst. Just take your time. The upper plate in the turret is far less hassle, a simple drop and glue job. Now you might think to get the turret roof on you just need to drop it onto the lower assembly, but as you can see that doesn't work. You actually need to slide the top barrel armour over the hull roof before it will locate down, though once you do that it's an easy and pretty positive fit. Everything can then be cemented in place. I started at the back and then internally, before the front spaced armour joint was done. I then went back and ensured I'd got enough cement inside for a strong bond of all those elements. The large flat side plates can then go onto the turret, and once again there are no real fit issues here. These small angled pieces at the rear of the turret can then be added. The modular side armour is just put in place without any glue at all, and then the small front section is glued in place to secure them. You could then theoretically open this, though I never will. I found the rear of the turret a little tricky at first, though after a few attempts I found it best to glue the bottom in first to get the location right, then cement the sides which needed careful positioning. With that done, the top of the rear could be dropped in and secured. I found I needed to apply some pressure and hold it for a while, but it held thereafter. The right hatch cupola could then be added, which aligns with no issues, though the central mounting hole did need cleaning up before attachment. The two turret radio masts can then be added, and though you have two options for these, there's no real guidance as to which is suitable for what version. I just chose the least fragile looking of them to put in. Some of the fiddly bits can then go on. The periscope cover, the rear winching point, and left hatch hinge all go on with no major issues, just the normal hazards of handling and cementing small parts. The commander's optical periscope can then be assembled, though it did require a fair bit of cleanup before this point on my example. The front two winching eyes can then be added, as well as that periscope we just made. Next are the armoured doors for the gunner's optics. If you want to have these open, you have to cut the part, and the hinged areas would also need filling as they are hollow on the part, not on the real thing. This isn't that sort of build though, so closed was the way to go. Last thing for the top of the turret is the other hatch cupola ring, which sits nicely and behaves itself. We then get to do a spot of basket making for the rear turret stowage bins. I expect many modelers would go to the trouble of replacing the mesh representation here with actual mesh, or just replace these entirely, but as this is a review of the kit, I made them as intended. They go together fine. Once complete, the basket's attached to the turret via 2 locating tabs with no issues. Smoke dispensers are next, which provide no challenge except requiring careful cleanup of the parts. Now before anyone thinks the plaster is because I stabbed myself in the thumb doing this, I did not. I actually sliced it with a bread knife whilst making a muffin for lunch, so be careful in the kitchen folks, it's more dangerous than modelling. The completed smoke dispenser assemblies once again fit very positively on cutouts on the hull, though there's a bit of leeway, so just take care that they're sitting straight. Finishing touches on the turret include the large grab handles on the side-spaced armour elements, as well as the hatches and machine gun. These all go together nicely, but I won't cement them until after painting. The turret complete, enough time had gone by to return to the hull and start on the suspension elements. These are excellent fits and provide no barrier to assembly at all. Including the front tensioning wheel mount. After that, the wheel suspension arms go in, and these are all a breeze too. Staggered return rollers also provide no issues. But please ignore what I've just done here, because you shouldn't glue the sprocket drives on yet, but I didn't read the instructions here and it came back to bite me later. Anyway, then we're on to the wheels. As you can see, zero issues here. And when they're on, they align perfectly. So here I am removing the drive wheels, and then moving on to the tracks. As I mentioned before, these have really broad attachment points and dry fit really nicely. As such, I'm just using some Loctite superglue here to bond them together. I do that on both joints and we've a completed track. And here's why you don't glue the drive wheels onto the hull before. Putting the tracks on the sprockets here so they sit correctly, and then placing the drive wheel onto the hull means you can just slide the rest of the track nicely over the wheels and return rollers, and it makes the whole process very painless. You then just secure that in place. Simple. I have to say the tracks actually look pretty good when they're on as well. Now onto that hull top. As for the bottom, fixing at the front and working backwards is the way to go here. Even so, this was the most problematic area of the kit, and it required a lot of cement and manipulation. I then had to clamp everything to get it to stay in position whilst it dried. Even then, however, I had to go back along the sides with more cement and pressure to ensure a good bond. In the end, I decided to tape the sides together using Tamiya masking tape, as it's not an easy area to clamp and it didn't need much force, just holding in place. Fortunately, there are plenty of gribbly bits to stick on the front of the Leopard whilst this is drying, which is what I set about doing. Like with many other elements of this kit, none of this presents any particular challenge, though I'm often at the point at this stage in a build where I just don't want to be dealing with more fiddly bits. The sliding front hatch pieces all go on flawlessly. And then weave more fiddly bits. First these pieces at the front. Then these elements of the front side armour, which did have some ejection pin marks or flash on them to clean up. That's true of several of the parts in this kit. They're not terrible, but many are noticeable or need addressing to get a good fit, as here, although no one will ever see that side of the armour when it's in place anyway. Spare track links go on the front here. Then it's the side armour. First these base plates. After which I needed to go back and address the rear hull once again. More cement, more clamping. Once that was finally done, the rear elements could be applied. Stowage bins, towing eyes, and lights. And then we're on the home straight. Some more rear pieces. This part on the left side of the hull. More rear hull pieces. The gun travel brace. And the other rear fan grille. Back to the front for the folded wing mirrors. Indicator cages. Whatever this is. And the headlights. With all those pieces added, the tape and the clamps removed, we can then put the side skirts in place. The large additional applique front cheek armour also goes on. And then we're back to the rear to superglue the mud flaps on. I still wasn't happy with the rear hull join, so I added a last application of cement and a final clamping to get it closed up completely. Now I did leave all the tools off the tank until after painting, but they all look pretty serviceable, with commendably thin handles and such, so no complaints there. Where complaints do come, however, is in the ridiculous tow cables. I can't express enough how stupid these are, from the extreme wastage to the poor appearance. They are thicker at one end to the other, so one towing eye doesn't fit, whereas the other is snug. These should be replaced by braided wire, and it's really not too much to have expected that in the kit. That just leaves the turret to actually be mated with the hull, which is via a traditional slotted ring mechanism. Now onto the figures. I started with the dog, of course, which is a simple two-piece assembly. There are no locating pins on any of the figures, but the fit is pretty intuitive, so just take your time. Although they have more parts, I find the figures just as easy. I start with the legs, then once those are aligned, the torso can go on. ICM's plastic really helps with making these figures too. The head is next. And finally the arms, which are usually the trickiest to align precisely to where you want or need them, but I also find the poses help you out in this regard. So let's have a look at everything. Overall, this is not a bad set at all. You can pick up the Revell boxing of this kit for about £35, whereas this set is about £10 more in the UK. The ICM Leopard crew set alone is a bit more than that at about £13, so this is a saving on buying them separately, and of course the regular Revell kit won't have the Ukrainian markings. I'll deal with the figures first, since they're much easier, being an automatic recommendation to anyone interested in this subject. I think ICM's figures are among the best available in injection moulded plastic, with fantastic detail, characterful poses, and that easy to use plastic. That leaves us with the Revell Leopard 2. This kit is the only Leopard I've built, so I have no direct comparison, but researching around, the Border models and Ryefield kits are widely hailed as the best available. These, however, are around the £55 to £60 mark for the base tank. The Tamiya is allegedly next, and it's around £40, with the Revell coming in fourth. Meng's kit is also very good, but it's not an A6, hence not really relevant here. So it seems in terms of the market, the Revell kit is appropriately priced. In terms of the kit and the build, the majority of the kit goes together very well. and the detail is more than adequate for someone that just wants to build the vehicle or make an interesting diorama set in the current conflict zone. The main issues I had, which weren't down to my own errors, were due to the warpage of the upper and lower hull pieces, which made fitment more onerous than usual, though not beyond the skills of the average modeller. I dare say that if you wrote to ICM or Revell to get replacements for these parts, you would without any issues, and then the build would be easy. The tracks were easy to make and looked pretty good once on. Again, certainly good enough for a casual builder. The only real negative in the kit are the dreadful tow cables, which are easily dealt with by using some homemade wire replacements. I built the entire tank in less than a day, even with the issue of the warped parts, so without those to deal with, it's quite good even as a mojo build, I think. So at the end of all of this, it really depends on what you're looking for, as always. At £45 for the heart of a diorama, this is really good value, and I'd recommend it to most modelers with a few kits under your belt that fancies the subject. If you're a hardcore modern AFV modeler, the kit will probably disappoint you, but you're probably already looking at a Ryefield or Border Models kit anyway, in which case I'd recommend you pick up the separate ICM Ukrainian Crew figure box, which is excellent. That's all for this instalment of Man's Model Moments. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel for more like it, and share this video with others you think would also enjoy it. You can also follow me on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and if you're feeling generous, then I also have a Patreon, which is absolutely the best way of helping me to grow the channel and produce more content like this. With that, I hope you have plenty of modelling moments of your own, and I look forward to welcoming you on the next video.